The moment changed Michael Turner's life between the cereal aisle and the freezer section of a small grocery store in Ohio, on a Tuesday evening that already felt heavier than it should have. He was standing there with a tired hand gripping a shopping basket and a mind full of unpaid bills, when a woman stepped into his path, looked straight into his face with unsettling certainty, and said she knew him. The words landed like a sudden storm, freezing him in place, because no one ever recognized Michael anymore, not the man he had become. If this opening already tugs at something inside you, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that grace often shows up when we least expect it. Michael was 38, a single father of two, and exhaustion had become his permanent companion. Since his wife had passed away 4 years earlier after a short, brutal illness, his life had narrowed into a daily cycle of work, parenting, and survival. He worked as a delivery driver for a regional warehouse, waking before dawn and returning home after dark, his body sore and his spirit stretched thin. His son Caleb was 10, old enough to understand loss but still young enough to feel it deeply, while his daughter Hannah was 6, clinging to routines and bedtime stories as if they were lifelines. Michael loved them fiercely, but love did not erase the loneliness that crept in during quiet moments or the guilt that whispered he was never doing enough. That evening, the grocery store felt like a final task in an already overwhelming day. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, carts rattled across tiled floors, and the smell of baked bread mixed with disinfectant. Michael moved through the aisles on autopilot, calculating prices, deciding what could be stretched until payday, choosing generic brands without complaint. His thoughts were on Caleb's upcoming school trip and Hannah's shoes, which were wearing thin at the soles. He barely noticed the people around him, which is why the woman's sudden certainty struck him so deeply. She was around his age, with chestnut hair pulled back neatly and eyes that carried both warmth and sorrow, the kind that suggested a story of her own. Michael's first instinct was suspicion. Life had taught him to be cautious. He wondered if she was mistaking him for someone else, or worse, if this was a setup of some kind. But there was no hint of deceit in her expression, only recognition and something like relief. She explained, not with drama but with quiet confidence, that she had known him years ago, long before grief had etched lines into his face and fatigue had weighed down his shoulders. She spoke of a younger man with hope in his eyes, a man who had once changed her life without ever realizing it. As they stood near the freezer doors, cold air brushing against their faces, memories Michael thought he had buried began to stir. He remembered a time before marriage, before children, when he had been a college student volunteering at a church-run food pantry in Indiana. Back then, his life had felt open and full of possibility. He had helped sort donations, carried boxes, and listened to stories from people who needed more than groceries. He had forgotten most of the faces, but apparently not all of them had forgotten him. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Collins, though she did not need a dramatic reveal. She reminded him of a winter afternoon when she had come to the pantry with her younger brother, frightened and embarrassed after their mother had been injured and unable to work. Michael had been the one to kneel down to her brother's level, offering him a candy bar and a smile, telling him everything would be okay even though Michael himself had no way of knowing if it would. To Michael, it had been a small moment, barely worth remembering. To Sarah, it had been the moment she realized kindness could exist without conditions. Sarah explained how that encounter had stayed with her through years of struggle. She had gone on to become a nurse, inspired by the compassion she had witnessed that day. She had built a stable life, married, and raised a family of her own. But she never forgot the young volunteer who treated her with dignity when she felt invisible. Standing there now, she said she recognized his eyes instantly, even though the rest of him carried the marks of hardship. Michael felt something crack open inside him. For years, he had defined himself by what he had lost and what he lacked. He had forgotten the version of himself who once gave freely, who believed his actions mattered. Hearing Sarah speak felt like being reminded of a forgotten truth, that his life had value beyond the endless grind of survival. The grocery store noises faded as emotions swelled in his chest, a mix of humility, gratitude, and disbelief. Their conversation drifted to the present, and Michael shared his story without self-pity but with honesty. He spoke of raising 2 children alone, of balancing love and responsibility, of nights when fear crept in despite his faith. Sarah listened without interrupting, her attention steady and sincere. She told him that seeing him again was not an accident, that she believed God often placed people back into our lives to remind us of who we were meant to be. Before they parted ways, Sarah offered help, not in a patronizing way, but as an extension of gratitude. She mentioned resources, connections, and a local community group that supported single parents. More importantly, she offered encouragement, telling Michael that his quiet perseverance mattered, that his children were watching and learning from his strength. When she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his half-filled basket, Michael felt lighter than he had in years. Driving home that night, the grocery bags rustling in the back seat, Michael replayed the encounter again and again. He thought about how close he had come to believing his life was small and insignificant. He thought about Caleb and Hannah, asleep in their beds, unaware that their father's faith had just been gently restored. That night, he prayed with a renewed sense of hope, thanking God for unexpected reminders of grace. Over the following weeks, subtle changes began to unfold. Michael reached out to the community group Sarah mentioned and found support he did not know existed. He met other parents walking similar paths, sharing advice, laughter, and encouragement. He became more patient with his children, more present, less burdened by the constant fear of failure. The weight of loneliness eased, replaced by a sense of belonging. One Sunday morning, Michael returned to volunteering, this time at a local shelter in Ohio. Standing behind a folding table, handing out food and offering smiles, he felt something come full circle. He saw himself in the faces of those he served, weary yet hopeful, and he understood that even the smallest acts could echo across years and lives. The woman at the grocery store had not just recognized him, she had reminded him of his calling. As this story draws close, if it has stirred something inside you, if it reminded you that kindness never disappears and second chances often arrive quietly, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive and reaching hearts that need them. And just before we end, leave a comment telling us what moment touched you most, or if you believe small acts of kindness can change lives. Michael still shops at the same grocery store, still counts his dollars carefully, still faces challenges like any single parent. But now, when he pushes his cart down those familiar aisles, he carries a renewed sense of purpose. He knows that even in the most ordinary places, God can orchestrate extraordinary moments, and that sometimes being seen by a stranger is exactly what it takes to remember who you truly are.